folks. Sit down and relax. I'm sure you know the Land of Rea has always been filled with stirring tales feeding our ever-hungry imagination. Let me read to you some of my favorite ones. Listen. Home. How brightly glistening in the sun the woodland ivy plays, while yonder beeches from their barks reflect his silver ray. That sun surveys a lovely scene from softly smiling skies, and wildly through unnumbered trees the wind of winter sighs. Now loud it thunders o'er my head, and now in distance dies. But give me back my barren hills, where colder breezes rise. Where scarce the scattered, stunted trees can yield an answering swell, but where a wilderness of heath returns the sound as well. For yonder garden, fair and wide, with groves of evergreen, long winding walks and borders trim, and velvet lawns between. Restore to me that little spot, with grey walls compassed round, where knotted grass neglected lies, and weeds usurp the ground. Though all around this mansion high invites the foot to roam, and though its halls are fair within, oh, give me back my home. This one is a bit different, but it's surely got magic. Brother and sister. Little brother took his little sister by the hand and said, "Since our mother died, we've had no happiness. Our stepmother beats us every day, and if we come near her, she kicks us away with her foot. Our meals are hard crusts of bread that are left over, and the little dog under the table is better off, for she often throws it a choice morsel. God pity us, if our mother only knew. Come, we will go forth together into the wide world." They walked the whole day over meadows, fields, and stony places, and when it rained, the little sister said, "Heaven and our hearts are weeping together." In the evening they came to a large forest, and they were so weary with sorrow and hunger and the long walk that they lay down in a hollow tree and fell asleep. The next day, when they awoke, the sun was already high in the sky and shone down hot into the tree. Then the brother said, "Sister, I am thirsty. If I knew of a little brook, I would go and just take a drink. I think I hear one running." The brother got up and took the little sister by the hand, and they set off to find the brook. But the wicked stepmother was a witch, and had seen how the two children had gone away, and had crept after them secretly, as witches creep, and had bewitched all the brooks in the forest. Now, when they found a little brook leaping brightly over the stones, the brother was going to drink out of it, but the sister heard how it said as it ran, "Who drinks of me will be a tiger. Who drinks of me will be a tiger." Then the sister cried, "Pray, dear brother, do not drink, or you will become a wild beast and tear me to pieces." The brother did not drink, although he was so thirsty, but said, "I will wait for the next spring." When they came to the next brook, the sister heard this also say, "Who drinks of me will be a wolf. Who drinks of me will be a wolf." Then the sister cried out, "Pray, dear brother, do not drink, or you will become a wolf and devour me." The brother did not drink and said, "I will wait until we come to the next spring, but then I must drink. Say what you like, for my thirst is too great." And when they came to the third brook, the sister heard how it said as it ran, "Who drinks of me will be a roebuck. Who drinks of me will be a roebuck." The sister said, "Oh, I pray you, dear brother, do not drink, or you will become a roebuck and run away from me." But the brother had knelt down at once by the brook and had bent down and drunk some of the water. And as soon as the first drops touched his lips, he lay there in the form of a young roebuck. And now the sister wept over her poor bewitched brother, and her little roe wept also, and sat sorrowfully near to her. But at last the girl said, "Be quiet, dear little roe. I will never, never leave you." Then she untied her golden garter and put it round the roebuck's neck, and she plucked rushes and wove them into a soft cord. This she tied to the little animal and led it on as she walked deeper and deeper into the forest. And when they had gone a very long way, they came at last to a little house, and the girl looked in. And it was empty, she thought. "We can stay here and live." Then she sought for leaves and moss to make a soft bed for the roe. And every morning she went out and gathered roots and berries and nuts for herself, and brought tender grass for the roe, who ate out of her hand and was content and played round about her. In the evening, when the sister was tired and had said her prayer, she laid her head upon the roebuck's back. That was her pillow, and she slept softly on it. And if only the brother had his human form, it would have been a delightful life. For some time they were alone like this in the wilderness, but it happened that the king of the country held a great hunt in the forest. Then the blasts of the horns, the barking of the dogs, and the merry shouts of the huntsmen rang through the trees, and the roebuck heard it all, and was only too anxious to be there. "Oh," said he to his sister, "let me be off to the hunt. I cannot bear it any longer." And he begged so much that at last she agreed. "But," she said to him, "come back to me in the evening. I must shut the door for fear of the rough huntsman. So knock and say, 'My little sister, let me in, that I may know you.' And if you do not say that, I shall not open the door." Then the young roebuck sprang away. So happy was he, and so merry in the open air. The king and the huntsman saw the lovely animal and started after him, but they could not catch him. And when they thought they surely had him, away he sprang through the bushes and vanished. When it was dark, he ran to the cottage, knocked, and said, "My little sister, let me in." Then the door was opened for him, and he jumped in and rested himself the whole night through upon his soft bed. The next day the hunt began again, and when the roebuck once more heard the bugle horn and the ho-ho of the huntsman, he had no peace, but said, "Sister, let me out, I must be off." His sister opened the door for him and said, "But you must be here again this evening and say your password." When the king and his huntsmen again saw the young roebuck with the golden collar, they all chased him, but he was too quick and nimble for them. This lasted the whole day. By the evening, the huntsmen had surrounded him, and one of them wounded him a little in the foot, so that he limped and ran slowly. Then a hunter crept after him to the cottage and heard how he said, "My little sister, let me in," and saw that the door was opened for him and was shut again at once. The huntsman took notice of it all and went to the king and told him what he had seen and heard. Then the king said, "Tomorrow we will hunt once more." The little sister, however, was dreadfully frightened when she saw that her fawn was hurt. She washed the blood off him, laid herbs on the wound, and said, "Go to your bed, dear roe, that you may get well again." But the wound was so slight that the roebuck next morning did not feel it any more. And when he heard again the sport outside, he said, "I cannot bear it. I must be there. They shall not find it so easy to catch me." The sister cried and said, "This time they will kill you, and here I am alone in the forest and forsaken by all the world. I will not let you out." "Then you will have me die of grief," answered the roe. "When I hear the bugle horns, I feel as if I must jump out of my skin." Then the sister could not do otherwise, but opened the door for him with a heavy heart, and the roebuck, full of health and joy, bounded into the forest. When the king saw him, he said to his huntsman, "Now chase him all day long till nightfall, but take care that no one does him any harm." As soon as the sun had set, the king said to the huntsman, "Now come and show me the cottage in the wood." And when he was at the door, he knocked and called out, "Dear sister, let me in." Then the door opened, and the king walked in, and there stood a maiden more lovely than any he had ever seen. The maiden was frightened when she saw not her little roe, but a man come in who wore a golden crown upon his head. But the king looked kindly at her, stretched out his hand, and said, "Will you go with me to my palace and be my dear wife?" "Yes, indeed," answered the maiden, "but the little roe must go with me. I cannot leave him." The king said, "It shall stay with you as long as you live, and shall want nothing." Just then he came running in, and the little sister tied him with the cord of rushes, took it in her own hand, and went away with the king from the cottage. The king took the lovely maiden upon his horse and carried her to his palace, where the wedding was held with great pomp. She was now the queen, and they lived for a long time happily together. The roebuck was tended and cherished and ran about in the palace garden. But the wicked stepmother, because of whom the children had gone out into the world, had never thought but that the sister had been torn to pieces by the wild beasts in the wood, and that the brother had been shot for a roebuck by the huntsman. Now, when she heard that they were so happy and well off, envy and jealousy rose in her heart and left her no peace, and she thought of nothing but how she could bring them again to misfortune. Her own daughter, who was ugly as night, and had only one eye, reproached her and said, "A queen? That ought to have been my luck." "Just be quiet," answered the old woman, and comforted her by saying, "When the time comes, I shall be ready." As time went on, the queen had a pretty little boy, and it happened that the king was out hunting. So the old witch took the form of a chambermaid, went into the room where the queen lay, and said to her, "Come, the bath is ready. It will do you good and give you fresh strength. Make haste before it gets cold." Her daughter also was close by. So they carried the weakly queen into the bathroom and put her into the bath. Then they shut the door and ran away. But in the bathroom they had made a fire of such hellish heat that the beautiful young queen was soon suffocated. When this was done, the old woman took her daughter, put a nightcap on her head, and laid her in bed in place of the queen. She gave her, too, the shape and look of the queen, only she could not make good the lost eye. But in order that the king might not see it, she was to lie on the side on which she had no eye. In the evening, when he came home and heard that he had a son, he was heartily glad and was going to the bed of his dear wife to see how she was. But the old woman quickly called out, "Oh, for your life, leave the curtains closed. The queen ought not to see the light yet and must have rest." The king went away and did not find out that a false queen was lying in the bed. But at midnight, when all slept, the nurse, who was sitting in the nursery by the cradle, and who was the only person awake, saw the door open and the true queen walk in. She took the child out of the cradle, laid it on her arm, and suckled it. Then she shook up its pillow, laid the child down again, and covered it with the little quilt. And she did not forget the roebuck, but went into the corner where it lay and stroked its back. Then she went quite silently out of the door again. The next morning, the nurse asked the guards whether anyone had come into the palace during the night, but they answered, "No, we have seen no one." She came thus many nights and never spoke a word. The nurse always saw her, but she did not dare to tell anyone about it. When some time had passed in this manner, the queen began to speak in the night and said, "How fares my child? How fares my roe? Twice shall I come, then nevermore." The nurse did not answer, but when the queen had gone again, went to the king and told him all. The king said, "Oh God, what is this? Tomorrow night I will watch by the child." In the evening he went into the nursery, and at midnight the queen again appeared and said, "How fares my child? How fares my roe? Once I will come, then nevermore." And she nursed the child as she was wont to do before she disappeared. The king dared not speak to her, but on the next night he watched again. Then she said, "How fares my child? How fares my roe? This time I come, then nevermore." Then the king could not restrain himself. He sprang towards her and said, "You can be none other than my dear wife." She answered, "Yes, I am your dear wife." And at the same moment, she received life again, and by God's grace became fresh, rosy, and full of health. Then she told the king the evil deed which the wicked witch and her daughter had been guilty of towards her. The king ordered both to be led before the judge, and the judgment was delivered against them. The daughter was taken into the forest, where she was torn to pieces by wild beasts, but the witch was cast into the fire and miserably burnt. And as soon as she was burnt to ashes, the roebuck changed his shape and received his human form again. So the sister and brother lived happily together all their lives. Have a sip of tea and listen. This one has an enchanting beauty. Lucy. Thanks for your stanzas, Lucy, my sister dear in song. How many pleasant fancies with these sweet numbers throng, which like spring's tuneful brooklets trip merrily along. Sometimes, my sportive Lucy, your words will whirl around like foam beads on the water, or rose leaves on the ground, or waltzers in the ballroom to music's airy sound. There is, my gentle Lucy, in all you say or do, a bright, poetic impulse, original and true, which art cannot acquire, and nature gave to you. The olden fable, Lucy, my muse to you would bring. The bird that can, but will not, should be compelled to sing the story and its moral to modern memories cling. Awake the harp, dear Lucy, like the electric wire. It will convey to millions the heart-absorbing fire, and those who lean to listen will linger to admire. Listen to this. My grandma used to read it to me before I went to bed. The Turnip. There were once two brothers who served as soldiers. One of them was rich and the other poor. Then the poor one, to escape from his poverty, doffed his soldier's coat and turned farmer. He dug and hoed his bit of land and sowed it with turnip seed. The seed came up, and one turnip grew there, which became larger and strong, and visibly grew bigger and seemed as if it would never stop growing, so that it might have been called the Princess of Turnips. For never was such an one seen before, and never will such an one be seen again. At length it was so enormous that by itself it filled a whole cart, and 2 oxen were required to draw it. And the farmer had not the least idea what he would do with the turnip, or whether it would be a fortune to him or a misfortune. At last he thought, "If you sell it, what will you get for it that is of any importance? And if you eat it yourself, why, the small turnips would do you just as much good. It would be better to take it to the king and make him a present of it." So he placed it on a cart, harnessed 2 oxen, took it to the palace, and presented it to the king. "What strange thing is this?" said the king. "Many wonderful things have come before my eyes, but never such a monster as this. From what seed can this have sprung? Or are you a favorite of good fortune? And have you met with it by chance?" No," said the farmer. "No favorite am I. I am a poor soldier who, because he could no longer support himself, hung his soldier's coat on a nail and took to farming land. I have a brother who is rich and well known to you, Lord King, but I, because I have nothing, am forgotten by everyone." Then the king felt compassion for him and said, "You shall be raised from your poverty, and shall have such gifts from me that you shall be equal to your rich brother." Then he bestowed on him much gold and lands and meadows and herds, and made him immensely rich, so that the wealth of the other brother could not be compared with his. When the rich brother heard what the poor one had gained for himself with a single turnip, he envied him and thought in every way how he could also come by a similar piece of luck. He set about it in a much more cunning way, however, and took gold and horses and carried them to the king, and made certain the king would give him a much larger present in return. If his brother had got so much for one turnip, what would he not carry away with him in return for such beautiful things as these? The king accepted his present and said he had nothing to give him in return that was more rare and excellent than the great turnip. So the rich man was obliged to put his brother's turnip in a cart and have it taken to his home. There, he did not know on whom to vent his rage and anger until bad thoughts came to him, and he resolved to kill his brother. He hired murderers who were to lie in ambush, and then he went to his brother and said, "Dear brother, I know of a hidden treasure. We will dig it up together and divide it between us." The other agreed to this and accompanied him without suspicion. While they were on their way, the murderers fell on him, bound him, and would have hanged him to a tree. But just as they were doing this, loud singing and the sound of a horse's feet were heard in the distance. On this, their hearts were filled with terror, and they pushed their prisoner hastily into the sack, hung it on a branch, and took to flight. He, however, worked up there until he had made a hole in the sack through which he could put his head. The man who was coming by was no other than a traveling student, a young fellow who rode on his way through the wood, joyously singing his song. When he who was aloft saw that someone was passing below him, he cried, "Good day! You have come at a lucky moment." The student looked round on every side, but did not know whence the voice came. At last he said, "Who calls me?" Then an answer came from the top of the tree. "Raise your eyes. Here I sit aloft in the sack of wisdom. In a short time I have learnt great things. Compared with this, all schools are a jest. In a very short time I shall have learnt everything, and shall descend wiser than all other men. I understand the stars, and the tracks of the winds, the sand of the sea, the healing of illness, and the virtues of all herbs, birds, and stones. If you were once within it, you would feel what noble things issue forth from the sack of knowledge." The student, when he heard all this, was astonished and said, "Blessed be the hour in which I have found you. May not I also enter the sack for a while?" He who was above replied, as if unwillingly, "For a short time I will let you get into it, if you reward me and give me good words. But you must wait an hour longer, for one thing remains which I must learn before I do it." When the student had waited a while, he became impatient and begged to be allowed to get in at once. His thirst for knowledge was so very great. So he who was above pretended at last to yield and said, "In order that I may come forth from the house of knowledge, you must let it down by the rope, and then you shall enter it." So the student let the sack down, untied it, and set him free, and then cried, "Now draw me up at once," and was about to get into the sack. "Halt," said the other, "that won't do," and took him by the head and put him upside down into the sack, fastened it, and drew the disciple of wisdom up the tree by the rope. Then he swung him in the air and said, "How goes it with you, my dear fellow? Behold, already you feel wisdom coming, and you are gaining valuable experience. Keep perfectly quiet until you become wiser." Thereupon he mounted the student's horse and rode away, but in an hour's time sent someone to let the student out again.
I've always felt this is about much more than just words.
The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here for evermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now to still the beating of my heart I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This is it, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortals ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here, I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but, with mien of lord or lady, perched upon my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further then he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore." But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust the door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy onto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking "Nevermore." This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core, on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. "Wretched," I cried, "thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within this distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign in parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as the token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door, take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still in sitting, on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.
It'll be music to your ears. Mother. Oh, I am going home again, back to the old house in the lane. And Mother, who still sits and sews, with cheeks each one a winter rose, a-watching for her boy, you know, who left so many years ago to face the world, its stress and strain. Oh, I am going home again. Yes, I am going home once more, and Mother'll meet me at the door, with smiles that rainbow tears of joy, and arms that reach out for her boy, and draw him to her happy breast, on which a while his head he'll rest, and care no more if rich or poor, at home with her, at home once more. Yes, I am going home to her, whose welcome evermore is sure. I have been thinking night and day how tired I am of being away, how homesick for her gentle face, and welcome of the old-time place, and memories of the days that were. Oh, I am going home to her. Oh, just to see her face again, a-smiling at the window pane, to see her standing at the door and offering her arms once more, as oft she did when just a child. She took me to her heart and smiled, and hushed my cry and cured my pain. I am going home to her again.
And that's all for today. Our fables came to an end, but who knows? Maybe I'll find more stories if you ask me. Now, have some rest. Tomorrow comes another exciting day.